To get started on it, I'm running a recording of the webinar, so we will be able to share that with you afterwards, and you can obviously send that on to colleagues once we get that uploaded on the website. Okay, so I'm going to hand you over to Rachel Irvine from Natural England.
Thanks very much, Becky, and hello and welcome everyone. Thanks very much for joining today's session, which is going to be focused, as Becky said, on Biodiversity Metric 3, specifically with the audience of local planning authority planners in mind. As Becky said, my name is Rachel Irvine. I'm a lead advisor in the Net Gain team here at Natural England, and I'm going to do a bit of an introduction to Biodiversity Metric 3, before then handing over to my colleague Steve, who's going to take you through the bulk of the presentation, going into more of the technical detail around using the metric, interpreting its outputs, and some top tips on things to look out for to ensure the metric's been applied correctly. The presentation is going to last for around 40 minutes, so that we then have plenty of time for the Q&A session. And for the Q&A session, just to repeat, and for anyone that maybe joined a little bit later, we're going to be using the platform Slido. So please submit your metric-related questions via Slido and not the chat function on Zoom. If you have any technical issues, then you can use the Zoom chat function for any technical queries, and someone will be able to assist you. To access our Slido event page, you can use the hashtag #AnyMetric via the Slido website on your computer web browser, or equally you can scan the QR code shown on the right-hand side of this slide with your smartphone camera, and it will take you directly there if you prefer to use your phone. On our Slido page, as well as asking your own questions, you can see what questions others have posed and vote for these if you also think that will be a useful question. And the final note, just to say on Slido, is that we will be running a poll to gather feedback. So we'd be really grateful if you could complete this. We'll let you know when it's live, which is likely to be towards the end of the Q&A session. So I'll get started. So a key part of the definition of biodiversity net gain, which is shown at the top of this slide, is that gains in habitat need to be quantifiable or measurable. And so the metric calculation tool is really fundamental to the net gain approach in helping us to do this. Back in July of this year, Biodiversity Metric 3 was released, and this is the successor to the beta Biodiversity Metric 2. Currently, there's no requirement to use Metric 3, and in fact, there are a variety of different metrics being used by different organisations. But the forthcoming Environment Bill will mandate the use of Metric 3, and this requirement to use just the one metric will help to provide confidence and consistency of approach across the board as to how losses and gains in habitat are measured. Metric 3 is designed to be simple yet sound in nature, and it uses habitats as a proxy measure and translates this into biodiversity units. The calculation tool itself includes all terrestrial and intertidal habitat types down to the mean low water mark, and it includes both area habitat types and also linear habitat types, such as hedgerows, lines of trees, rivers and ditches, as well as green infrastructure features, including green roofs, urban trees and sustainable urban drainage systems. And there's also a GIS data import facility within the tool. The metric calculates any losses and or gains as a result of a project or development by calculating the baseline of the habitats present prior to work commencing, and then forecasting a proposed outcome based on the habitats present once the intervention has occurred. And from that, any net gains or losses between those two figures are calculated. And just finally, it's worth saying here that the metric is under constant refinement, and we would always welcome feedback on it. So if you encounter any problems or issues when you're using it, then please do let us know. So biodiversity net gain more broadly is intended to be additional to and not to replace existing protections to biodiversity or habitat. The metric itself sits within a wider decision framework that is based on the mitigation hierarchy of avoid, mitigate, compensate. And it is very much intended to be a tool to aid in decision-making, to go alongside all of the other factors that need to be considered and not to be a decision-making tool in itself. So everything possible should be done to first avoid and then minimise impacts on biodiversity before compensation is then pursued. And in addition to that, the core principles of biodiversity net gain, such as not trading down in habitats and ensuring the rules around additionality are adhered to, should always be applied. Steve is going to go into a bit more detail around this a little later on, but I wanted to highlight here that the metric has been designed in a way to recognise the importance of place. So the wider net gain agenda emphasises the objective of bringing nature to the doorstep, and the metric kind of reiterates this by encouraging habitat to be enhanced in the locality of where any impacts have occurred, and also encouraging habitat works to line up with local priorities. So consequently helping contribute to England's nature recovery network so that the most biodiversity gains are achieved in situations where compensating for losses within the development footprint itself isn't possible or won't generate the most benefits for nature conservation. So the metric is intended to be used in the initial stages of a development process to quantify the ecological impact of a project and evaluate the impacts of different design options when there is more scope to influence design changes in order to achieve better ecological outcomes. As I mentioned, the calculation tool includes both area and linear habitat types, as well as watercourses and riverine habitats. And it has been designed to be a versatile tool that can be applied to a really wide range of different projects and developments at all different scales. So, for example, these could include and range from a straightforward residential development to a port development impacting on the intertidal environment or a river restoration scheme. So it's designed to be a versatile tool that can be applied at all those scales and help in the decision-making process to achieve better ecological outcomes. And I'm going to hand over to Steve now to run through more of the technical details.
Thanks, Rachel. Just bear with me a second while I share my screen. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. So thanks very much. My name's Stephen Panks. Good morning. I'm a senior specialist in Biodiversity Net Gain. I've been working on the Biodiversity Metric now for the last kind of 2 to 3 years, taking it slowly on a transition through from the original DEFRA metric that supported the biodiversity offsetting pilots back in 2012 through the publication of Biodiversity Metric 2 and on to Biodiversity Metric 3 that we're going through this morning. So just to give you a sort of sense really of that sort of transition and the sort of things that have changed along the way there. So the other thing that I wanted to sort of reiterate just before getting into the nitty-gritty of the metric, Rachel mentioned the calculation tool, and that's the main interface that most of the users of the metric will deal with on a daily basis. But it's also accompanied by a sort of range of guidance and condition assessments, and together they form the whole package of measures. So the condition assessments are sort of published separately in an Excel form and included within the sort of technical supplement as well. And they're the sort of things that the ecological consultants will be using on the ground to sort of benchmark the habitats. And the user guide will set out the sort of the way the metric works in some detail, and also the sort of rules and principles associated with its use. So it's important to understand the full toolkit there. The other thing that I wanted to flag before we get into the detail itself is that the metric isn't a complex ecological model. It's something, as Rachel said, that's been designed to be simple and sound. So it uses habitats as a proxy for biodiversity. And whilst that's a rational means for measuring the sort of biodiversity value, it is very much a simplification of the real world, and is something that, you know, the values, whilst they have been informed by ecological reasoning, they're not scientifically precise or absolute. So it's just important to understand that it measures the relative worth of one habitat or one scenario against another, but it very much needs that ecological interpretation and ecological advice to be used alongside the metric as you interpret the results. So the metric itself, the calculations are based on a range of different sort of quality attributes of the habitat. So taking account of the size of the habitat, the type of habitat that's on site, the condition of that habitat, and where it's located spatially. And those calculations are sort of run at the baseline to give a sort of value before any development proposals are in place. And then they're repeated after the development proposals have been sort of worked up, and to sort of work out really where the scenario is going to take you and what sort of losses and gains a particular development scenario is likely to deliver. And at that point, it sort of builds into the calculation the risks of recreating habitat elsewhere. And I'll come on to that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And the baseline scenario is then deducted from the sort of post-development scenario, and that gives you either the sort of uplift that we're looking for, or informs the users that there are sort of losses and offsite compensation is required for those. So that's in a crude sense the way the metric is working, and the calculation tool has been published to do all the hard work, so nobody will need to sort of run the calculations, but it just is useful just to understand what the tool is doing in basic sense, really. So in terms of the quality measures, all the different types of habitat have been sort of banded and looked at into various distinctiveness bands. So we've sort of graded everything from low distinctiveness type habitats, so they're the sort of general agricultural sort of habitats, so sort of arable land or intensive agricultural grassland, through to very high distinctiveness, very rare habitats like lowland meadows. And so all of those sort of scores for each of the habitats that are within the metric have been pre-populated within the metric and are published behind the scenes in the calculation tool and in the technical supplement that I mentioned earlier. So that's all there for everybody to look at if they want to. Condition is a variable that needs to be assessed by ecologists on site, and people who are suitably qualified to assess the habitat for that particular type at that particular time of year that they're required to go out, and using the condition assessments for each broad habitat type that, again, I mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation. And they will attribute then a score based on whether it's a sort of poor through to good condition, and there's sort of scores attributed to that. And then I mentioned the sort of spatial location aspect as well. So we'll come on to this in a little bit more detail later on, but effectively there's a score based on the location of where any habitat is sort of created, as whether that is sort of linked with local strategic priorities, whether it's something that fits with local drivers for wildlife, or whether it links to nature recovery networks and so on. And the metric works by basically applying a score to each of those, multiplying it together and giving you a value. And then, as I said, on the delivery risk side, so once you're sort of into the post-development scenario, and if you need to sort of create habitat that's been compromised by development, then it's a question of looking at the type of habitat and how difficult that is to restore or recreate. And again, as the people that have sort of derived the metric, we have looked at those values and made some value judgments in consultation with NGOs and consultant ecologists and others to come up with a range of difficulty values for each of the habitats. So that data is all sort of pre-populated within the tool to avoid discussions on a site-by-site basis. Similarly with the sort of temporal risk, so that builds into the fact that a habitat might be lost today, but it might take 5, 10 or 15 years to get to the target condition. And so the temporal risk multiplier sort of factors into the metric and reduces the scores just slightly to account for the fact that the habitat won't be as valuable until it's reached that condition over time. And then finally, on the risk side, there's also a sort of spatial risk multiplier, which takes into account where any habitat that's sort of being proposed in compensation for any losses is actually sort of located relative to the losses. So is it sort of adjacent in the adjacent land, or is it within the neighbouring LPA, or is it somewhere else further afield in the country? And obviously, what we're trying to do is to look at trying to incentivize the creation of habitat close to where the losses are occurring, because that's where it's most beneficial to the wildlife. So the metric itself is a tool that sort of deals with all that functionality, but to make it work, it's sort of set within a series of principles. So there are 8 principles and 6 rules associated with the biodiversity metric, and it just basically sets it in context a little bit. And as decision makers using the metric, it's quite important to understand these rules and to understand whether developments are using the metric sort of in conjunction with the rules and principles. And I don't sort of propose to read them all out, but they're published within the user guide, and it would be important just to sort of refer to those. So it's sort of basic things like it doesn't change the protection that's afforded to biodiversity at the moment. This is something that's additional, and it's something that, you know, again, reinforcing the fact that metric units are only a proxy for biodiversity and should be treated as sort of relative values rather than absolute values. So it just sets in context the principles around using the metric. And again, just to sort of point you in the direction of principle 6, the metric is designed to inform decisions rather than override expert opinion. So it's just a useful tool, but it's important to understand the context in which it's being used. And again, just sort of layered down under the principles for using the metric, there are a series of rules associated with using it. So they govern things like habitat trading and what's acceptable. And we're looking for a like-for-like basis for higher distinctiveness habitats, so that, you know, if an important woodland is lost, then we're looking for that to be replaced on a like-for-like basis, but there's more flexibility further down in terms of the lower distinctiveness habitats. And also things like, you know, the area of the habitat or the length is not what determines its ecological sort of significance, but the net change in biodiversity units is what we're looking for. So it's not just a size sort of thing. And then just to point you in the direction of rule 6 as well. So any deviations from the metric need to be ecologically justified and agreed. So there is scope in rare circumstances to deviate from the metric, but that should be very much the exception rather than the rule. And that needs to be based on full ecological sort of credentials rather than just because it's sort of more convenient to do so. So the other thing that I was going to just draw your attention to is the way the metric can influence where net gain delivery can happen. So it's one of the key drivers for net gain delivery, and looking at whether it can be, you know, achieved on site to start with. And that's always the first choice, is to see what can be achieved on site by getting things done early at the design phase, and looking at you know, really retaining some of those existing habitats on site and working around them where possible. But where that's not possible and developers need to go off-site, then the metric can be a useful tool for aligning with where locally it's important to see and get resource into developing sort of habitats to align with local strategies. And over the longer term, that's likely to be sort of linking up with nature recovery strategies and be able to sort of fill in those gaps between, particularly for, you know, filling in the gaps between designated sites and where you might want to sort of see those habitat corridors built. But in the short term, recognizing that there are, you know, different local authorities are in different places. We've kept the definition of what a local strategy is fairly broad at the moment, so that we can include sort of green infrastructure strategies or sort of local plans or neighbourhood plans and those kind of things. So it's really about, you know, the metric incentivizing where locally you would like to see that sort of net gain habitat delivered, basically. So in terms of the process around the metric, it's likely to be the ecological consultants that are sort of doing all the legwork in terms of filling in the metric and providing you with that data. And it will be at the sort of end of the process in informing the decisions that most people from local authority backgrounds will be engaging with the metric itself. And so it's just to understand really that, you know, there's a whole raft of things that will happen before you get to see it, in terms of sort of project planning and data collection and running the calculations, then informing the design decisions, hopefully using the metric calculations and potentially a bit of a feedback loop there. But it's at that end point where, as local authority planners, you'll be sort of engaging with the metric. So, as I said, it's the consultants that will be filling it in. And I won't dwell on this one too much, but it just gives you a sense of where they'll be at. So they will start with the baseline. So at the picture at the top right hand of the screen there, you can see the on-site baseline. That will then open up the tab for them to fill in all of the detail that's on the sort of baseline site, and then they will move from left to right across that main screen as required, filling in any habitat that they're enhancing and filling in any habitat that they're proposing to create. And then the main menu is color coded as well. So underneath the green row, there's a brown row for hedgerows and a blue row for rivers and streams, and they need to be kept separately sort of accounted for within the metric. So once the ecological consultants have filled the metric in and run their calculations and so on, they will then submit it to yourselves. And the idea is that they will submit the entire spreadsheet so that you've got everything sort of transparent and be able to interrogate the tool as much or as little as you feel is necessary, depending on the application itself. And from an LPA's perspective, it'll likely to be the results that you'll be most interested in. So it'll be a question of popping to the main menu, clicking the results button you can see highlighted there at the top right of the screen. And that will open up a sort of mini results menu. And the results are displayed in 3 different ways. So we've got headline results, which is just a little snapshot. We've got some detailed results, which give the more detailed sort of changes on a habitat by habitat basis, and a trading summary, which details how the habitat trading is complying with the rules that I mentioned earlier on, and whether there's any changes that are needed as a result or whether it's fine. So we'll run through each of those briefly going forward. So as I said, the main headline results is just literally a snapshot of what's going on. You'll see there that the main habitat units are presented differently from the hedgerow and river units, and it's important again to keep those separately and sort of make sure if somebody is using a different metric that they're presenting those separately as well. And it also just gives you a sense of whether the trading rules have been satisfied. It doesn't give you any detail around what's actually sort of happening, but it just lets you know that the trading rules are satisfied or otherwise there. And then in terms of the detailed results, that's on a sort of broad habitat basis. So it looks at all of the grassland habitats together, all of the woodland habitats together, the heathland scrub and so on. And it presents the sort of results in that sort of amalgamated fashion, both in a tabulated form, and you'll see in a minute in a visual representation as well. So again, that's quite useful at seeing what changes are actually sort of happening on the ground. Are you losing lots of grassland and gaining some woodland, or what actually is happening in terms of the background habitat changes and not just the numerics that the headline results deals with. And that is repeated as well separately in the detailed results for hedgerows and rivers and streams as well. So as I said, you get a visual representation with the detailed results as well. And this is just a quick snapshot of some of that, but sometimes it's quite useful just to be able to see in a graphic representation what's happening, where your changes are, where your gains and losses are across the piece. And it will cover sort of on-site and off-site changes as well within the detailed results there. And then the trading summary is set at the individual habitat level. So it shows the exact losses of particular habitats and then the gains in other habitats. And it basically amalgamates all of those changes and then sort of works out according to each different distinctiveness band whether the trading is acceptable or otherwise, and will flag to you that the trading rules have been complied with. And if they haven't, it will show you where there is kind of deficits and where you need to perhaps go back to the consultants or the developer and try and rectify the situation. So as I said, the idea is that the whole tool will be supplied to you as well. So whilst you won't be too concerned with the details or with filling in any of the details, it is something that will be there for the sake of transparency should you need to refer to it. And just to give you the understanding that all of the white cells will be data that's put in by the consultants, and anything that's in that sort of brown buff color is something that's auto-populated by the tool itself based on the lookups and the choices that are within the technical detail of the tool itself. But it's useful to know that it's there just in case, if you're starting to sort of question the validity of any of the metric calculations, or you want to be able to sort of drill down into that detail for particular cases and just query whether or not something is valid or sensible. That's the place to go, sort of looking for it. And you can access all of the various different screens, so from the sort of baseline to habitat creation and so on, from the main menu that I showed you earlier. And the other thing to flag at the end of those sort of rows, there is a sort of comment section. And that's a very useful place for ecologists to sort of put in justification for some of the decisions they've made, some of the choices they've made, perhaps around the habitat condition, or if they've needed to deviate from something for one reason or another, a sort of justification as to why the ecological constraints associated with the site have led them to that conclusion. So again, that's something as assessors that it might be very useful for you to sort of look into that detail for, particularly if there's anything that you're sort of starting to query from the initial look at the headline results or the detailed results. It's useful to be able to see that justification there. And then just a couple of additional functions within the tool to flag. So again, at the main menu next to where the results button is, there's a technical data button, which is very useful if you just want to sort of quickly reference any of the technical data that's also published in the technical supplement, but it's all contained within the tool as well to save you cross-referencing if you need to. And again, instructions for using the tool itself. So they're not the full suite of user guidance that goes with the metric, but just some basic instructions on how to use the calculation tool itself. Are embedded within the tool, just as a quick reference guide there. And then I'll just run through a couple of sort of fairly basic case studies just to sort of illustrate the difference really between delivering net gain on site and then having to go off site. And in this situation, there was a small development that was a mixture of intensive agricultural grassland and neutral grassland and some woodland. And the site was bounded by species-rich hedgerow. And there was a proposal for a 3.04 hectare development with a 70-30 split between sort of developed land and gardens put forward. And so we'll look on the next slide with what was delivered. So just over a 10% net gain was delivered by creating green roofs, gardens, some sustainable urban drainage features and some urban trees, and by retaining the woodland that was already on site and enhancing some of the neutral grasslands to a moderate condition. So just the sort of combination of those on-site effects delivered that 10% net gain, and then separately a 12% net gain was delivered on the hedgerows by a combination of retaining and enhancing the existing hedgerows that bounded the site with a small amount of additional hedge creation there as well. So that gave you a sort of sense of, by being a bit creative and using some of the urban features like green roofs, there was scope to deliver that gain on site. In the next scenario, a similar size site, slightly different habitat composition with some bramble mixed in, as well as some sort of grassland and agricultural grassland and the woodland. But there was a slightly bigger development footprint in this scenario, again with that 70-30 split between developed area and gardens. But on this site, there wasn't scope to deliver 10% gain on site itself. And that meant that the developer needed to go off site and find some off site sort of compensation to fill in the gaps, as it were. So in combination with the on-site and the off-site measures, then a 10% gain was eventually delivered by sort of creating some mixed scrubs, some gardens, and some sustainable urban drainage on site by sort of retaining and enhancing the existing woodland, but also by creating some new woodland off site as well as the enhancement of some grassland offsite. So it sort of required both that on-site and off-site sort of use. And you can see there on the main menu that was using the sort of full suite of tabs across from left to right on the main menu, requiring that. So it just sets the scene really that for some developments, they'll be able to achieve net gain by being creative on-site. For others, depending on the aims of the scheme and the need for perhaps using more land for the development footprint, might sort of push them to need to go off-site and be a bit more creative off-site. So I'm sort of getting to the point where I'll be wrapping up shortly, but before I do, just some sort of top tips for using the metric. And after that, I'll sort of run through some sort of indications of where and how to avoid sort of bad practice and so on. So as I've said, going through, it's quite important that all applications are supported by the full metric spreadsheet. And that's basically because it gives you that sort of scope to interrogate the full metric, and it provides that more transparent approach. And so, if they just provide screenshots, it doesn't really give you the opportunity to drill down into that data and fully understand what's proposed on site. The other thing is, currently at the moment, if they're using metric 2, although we've upgraded to metric 3, unless your local policies say that you're now required to submit applications using metric 3, there is no current sort of requirement to use that. That will change as we get towards the mandated approach that's currently going through at the moment, but for now, that's the position. The other thing, as I've stressed going forward, is looking at the different types of biodiversity units. So there's the main suite of terrestrial habitats are measured by their area as well as the distinctiveness and so on, but rivers and hedgerows are measured by their length. And so because they're not transferable, it's important that they are kept separate and accounted for separately, as shown in some of the results. So it's just important to check that as you're going through. And then also look at the sort of rationale and the evidence behind some of the decisions that have been made, particularly around selecting the habitat type or the condition, and check out the sort of notes section if there's anything to suggest that you feel things aren't quite as they seem, or there are perhaps high distinctiveness habitats that are proposed to be created and so on. It's just important to be able to evidence-base those, particularly to refer to things like management plans and so on, and see whether there's anything that suggests that it's practical to do what's being proposed. And then also sort of check the detailed results, look at the types of habitat change. Is it appropriate for the area that we're looking at? Is it appropriate for the biodiversity, the sort of changes that are proposed, or are they just looking to play the numbers game? And have those habitat trading rules been met, crucially as well? So are they being replaced on a like-for-like basis where there are any losses to high distinctiveness habitats and so on and so forth? And the other thing to sort of check for as well is the enhancement tab. Has that been used correctly? So generally within the metric, we're looking for enhancement to be within the same broad habitat type. So improvements either in grassland condition or in grassland that would take it on that trajectory to a genuinely better quality grassland habitat, but still within the same broad habitat type. Or are people looking to try and use use enhancement instead of creation? So just important to check that that's the case there. And then the other thing to sort of stress is there are a series of error messages within the tool, so a series of checks and balances to try and make sure where possible that the tool flags where things are not as they seem, or where certain functions are being used, like the advanced habitat sort of creation function. It flags to check for evidence that the habitat's actually been created in advance before developers are using that function. But that said, the tool can only go so far in sort of minimizing the risk of inappropriate use. And so there's a few things that you need to look out for when you're assessing metric calculations, particularly things like attempts to undervalue the baseline habitat or overvalue the proposed sort of future habitat. Look out for calculations that are making the situation seem very, very rosy when there might not be the opportunities on site to do that, or the ecological kind of parameters might prevent that from happening. So again, just sort of things to be aware of. Another thing that we're starting to get flagged is issues with the red line boundary and where that's being drawn, and look out for attempts to sort of reduce the liability by amending the red line boundary to suit and cookie cutting out either important bits of habitat or rivers and streams that run through the site and so on. So again, cross-check that back with your own sort of guidance around drawing red lines, and check that suits the existing sort of guidance, and the red line that's proposed is actually appropriate for the scheme. And then a quick sort of reference back to the rules and principles around the application of the metric that I mentioned earlier, and just sort of sense check in your head whether they've actually been complied with, and how the metric has sort of been put into to fit within those rules and principles. And particularly focus on things that are looking to deliver sort of high distinctiveness habitats, particularly on the development site, or where they're looking for good condition, and give it that sort of reality check. Are the ecological sort of features there to support those decisions, or are they sort of reaching too far and perhaps need to rein in their aspirations just slightly? So it's about sort of looking for the evidence base and looking at the notes and justification section as well within the biodiversity metric, and then also check the strategic significance. So I mentioned that was where we're sort of looking at linking to local plans and local authorities being able to sort of steer where investment goes, but does it, do individual proposals align closely with your own local sort of plans and strategies and aspirations, and look at the sort of evidence as to how that's been used, and are they using the strategic significance for all the habitats in a particular area, or just for some of them that are sort of more important. So it's just important to sort of check that through. So in summary, just to sum up before I pass back to Rachel, the metric is fundamental to biodiversity net gain. It provides that measurability angle. It's a useful conversation starter. So it's anecdotally, it's bringing the conversations around the ecological impacts of development right to the beginning of that process, where it can be sort of incorporated into the design, where there's still scope to reinforce the mitigation hierarchy, and where there's scope to really sort of think about how to incorporate biodiversity measures within that sort of design process. So on that point, it's very advantageous, but it's also something, as I said, isn't a sort of ecological model. It's not based on absolutely robust and precise science. It's a proxy for biodiversity and needs to be treated in that respect. And it's very useful for gauging relative values of one scenario against another. But it is additional to existing approaches, and it fits within that existing mitigation hierarchy framework. It's additional to existing approaches for species and designated sites. And so it is just important to understand the context of where the metric sits. But hopefully that's been a useful sort of ramble through the metric. And I'll now pass you back to Rachel, and we'll open it up for questions and see how people feel. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Steve. So I'll head straight into the Q&A session now. And as a reminder, I think we've had quite a few questions in already, so thank you very much to everyone that submitted those. But just as a reminder, if you'd like to ask a metric-related question, please submit this on the Slido event page, which can be accessed by entering the hashtag AnyMetric on the Slido webpage.
So if I could just come in, so I know we've got lots of perhaps broader questions in the metric, just to say, because I know some people weren't able to join right at the start. Just to say, this webinar sits within a wider project that Planning Advisory Service is leading, a DEFRA funded project getting local authorities ready for net gain. And as part of that, we're compiling a lot of training and guidance. We've got some stuff already up on our website. We ran some events earlier on in the summer, and those are available. I will circulate those, the link to those afterwards, but we're working on more stuff around development management, policy planners, and the journey to mandatory biodiversity net gain. We're also having some frequently asked questions. So any questions we can't answer today, we will add to those. So just to say, if your question is a bit broader, we may not be able to come onto it today, but please don't feel it's been forgotten. We are clocking all of those and we will add them onto our list. So yeah, just to explain that. Thanks, Rachel.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Becky. So first question today has been voted on a lot, so it's a very popular question. How would you deal with a situation where a developer has cleared a site in advance of putting in a planning application to effectively reduce the biodiversity for the baseline?
Okay, thank you. So it depends on which habitat type. So with woodland particularly, we've got a sort of felled woodland category within the metric, and the guidance suggests that the developer ought to be using that in that scenario. But Nick and Amanda, I don't know whether you want to come in, Nick, on any sort of policy related context around where the baseline is likely to be sort of drawn from in terms of where to set the timescales for that.
Yeah, happy to, Steve. It's a great question. And it's a really important point as well, because obviously the baseline and getting that baseline right is fairly fundamental to making sure that, you know, the calculation is accurate and is a true representation of what was there before the development started. So as Steve mentioned, there is some capacity within the metric to try and help with that in terms of the felled woodland. But outside of the metric, it's really important to try and establish and agree with the developer that actually you're happy as an authority that what they're saying is the baseline situation actually reflects the reality before the development started. In that context, what the Environment Bill says potentially is quite helpful as well, because it recognises that there will be cases where there's a dispute and it's not always agreed between the parties as to what the baseline is. In that case, the bill establishes a default baseline of the day the bill entered Parliament as becoming the baseline for net gain if you and the developer can't agree to that. And that date was the 30th of January 2020. So it would normally be expected you'd reach a kind of mutual agreement amongst with the developer on that date. But if you can't agree for some reason, then the default is that date that the bill came into Parliament. That's for mandatory net gain. So that's when that comes in the future.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, both.
And just to add to that, actually, someone put a comment in the chat, but also obviously, refer to things such as aerial photographs, Google Earth, other resources available as well, if you're wanting to actually double check that what they're saying was the situation before the development commenced, seems to reflect the kind of reality on the ground as well. So do look for supporting evidence or ask them for supporting evidence that the baseline is accurate.
Thanks, Nick. The next most voted on question is how can the metric be applied to an outline application where the layout has not been established?
Okay, so the metric can be used at different scales, and you might need to make some value judgments, particularly around sort of condition, and so you might want to take a sort of precautionary approach around that. You can apply the 70-30 split that we applied in the case study between the sort of developed area and gardens. So it won't really matter if you haven't completely planned out, if you work on that sort of basis of a 70-30 split, if you know the overall kind of percentage of the area that is likely to be developed. And then it's just a question of trying to I guess sort of plan where you might want to retain any existing habitats, and you can do that without knowing the full design as well. Nick, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that at all.
Only just to say, yeah, we would encourage by the developer the earliest possible use of the metric. So ideally, yeah, to help them inform decisions around site selection and kind of initial outline designs. We'd encourage them to submit something with an outline application. Obviously, they may not have had access to the site, so they won't have been able to undertaken a site survey to any detailed level. So in that instance, it's important, as Steve said, for them to have taken a precautionary approach, and yeah, you to be advising accordingly as well, so that hopefully there are no surprises down the line as access to the site becomes available and they're able to actually undertake site surveys. But yes, you can use the metric without having access to a site. And again, it's just applying a precautionary principle when putting estimates through it in terms of what the likely condition or otherwise of habitats is likely to be.
Thank you. Next up, how would you deal with a situation where, oh no, we've covered that one, sorry. If gardens are counted as net gain, how do we prevent habitat loss through residents converting gardens to hard surfaces and outbuildings allowed as PD?
So some of that is kind of covered in terms of the risk multipliers that are applied to gardens and so on. Other aspects, it's a low distinctiveness type of habitat without a condition assessment that's needed. So it gives a very low proxy value to gardens and does sort of cover the fact that there is a risk that some will be paved over and so on. But overall, on balance, there is still a lot of garden space that's retained for many years with green spaces in. So it provides a sort of low level of biodiversity.
Yeah, and just to chip in onto that as well. So there has been some discussion in the chat as to whether gardens cannot count towards biodiversity net gain. Under mandatory net gain, they will be able to be counted. And obviously there is a risk that gardens are, as people have highlighted, can get paved over, not well managed. And so that is accounted for in terms of how they score within the metrics. The metric assumes a significant proportion of gardens will potentially get lost or potentially be of low value, but they are there as a habitat that can be used for odd-site delivery of contributions towards net gain. In terms of permitted developments, at the moment, mandatory net gain isn't intended to be applied to permitted developments, and subject to there being any change on that, I assume that will continue to be the case as well. So the mandatory approach wouldn't cover permitted developments.
Thanks very much. Next up, if the local planning authority does not have access to ecological expertise, how do they assess whether the assessment of condition is accurate?
So I think it's quite a challenging one, because the metric does require at least a certain amount of ecological expertise. I think it's drawing on existing data sources as much as possible. So looking for things like a management plan or anything that will sort of advise you what's going on site, but also looking for obvious checks and balances, checking the main flags within the metric as well, because most of the data that the metric draws on is pre-populated within the metric. So it's really only the on-site condition assessment sort of elements there. But it is a challenging one that ultimately, I guess, there will be a sort of driver for more ecological resource needed at the LPA level. And Nick, I don't know whether you've got any comments or observations on that.
The only additional one I'd say is obviously, Algae, Adept, others have all highlighted the need for additional ecological resource at a local authority level. It's something within Natural England we'd obviously support as well. And I know there have been conversations with government about like a extra level of resourcing to local authorities to help ensure they're ready and have the appropriate expertise and access to that expertise for mandatory net gain. So those conversations are ongoing with government, and hopefully there will be something positively announced from government in the next few weeks as well. But but yes, it's a fair point. It does need a level of ecological support, either in-house or available from third parties such as wildlife trusts or others as well. And we would support efforts to try and increase ecological capacity within local planning authorities. And just to add to that, there was also a question, Rachel, sorry, about whether Natural England would be offering kind of bespoke advice on, or could be called upon to look at particular metric calculations. It's not a role we will be taking on at an individual project level. So we will kind of be engaging authorities strategically around net gain policy and practice. We obviously have our discretionary advice service that's available to developments if they choose to go down that route. But as an organisation, we won't be doing kind of individual kind of metric assessments.
Thanks very much, Nick. The next most voted question is potentially a slightly wider question, but I think worth posing anyway. What level of information will be required for plan making? Would allocations need to be supported by assessments? And is a strategic approach required for mitigation?
Nick, is that something I can pass to you to bring in?
Yeah, so strategic allocations is a good one. So this is also an instance where the authority themselves might be, certainly we would encourage the use of the metric when thinking about strategic allocations as well. So as Steve said, it's designed to support and work with the mitigation hierarchy. So getting a sense of actually what's possible and what the kind of baseline of some of those allocated sites might be, how achievable net gain within those sites might be from the developer's perspective, and whether it might require them to go offsite. So we'd encourage authorities to be using the metric themselves as well when it comes to that. But then also, the metric is just a tool, and it's there to work with and support the delivery of kind of wider biodiversity, environmental and kind of people benefits as well associated with nature. So when thinking about kind of net gain and more generally, it's also an opportunity to be thinking about how delivery of net gain could also contribute towards kind of wider local policies around access, green space, health and well-being, climate change, etc. as well. So the risk, although net gain is on the tin, it just does look at the kind of biodiversity values of a site. There is a real opportunity here, particularly at a strategic scale, to say, actually, how can it be delivered, and how can we incentivize its delivery in a way that kind of maximizes wider local benefits as well, and how does it link to other local plans? I don't know if anyone else wants to add into that too, in terms of others on the panel.
Nothing additional from me there, I think.
Okay, thank you very much. The next, I'm going down the list in terms of how highly rated the questions are. So lots of people looking for an answer for this one. It's again a slightly wider, potentially policy-related question. But how is offsite net gain expected to be secured? Will Section 106 be required? And what about enforcement of these?
So at the moment, it would be, so in terms of existing policies, it would be normally through Section 106 agreements. For mandatory net gain, it's envisaged that there are two main kind of mechanisms. So firstly, any offsite delivery does need to be legally secured. So there's a requirement on the landowner of that site, irrespective of who they are, to have that site registered on a national net gain register. And part of that registration requires there to be a legal agreement that's underpinning the offsite delivery in the form either of a planning obligation or a conservation covenant. Conservation covenants are another feature of the current Environment Bill. They're a new legal mechanism for England that potentially can allow land to be secured in perpetuity if the landowners are in agreement. So it's envisaged there will essentially be two mechanisms for legally securing offsite. One is the kind of planning obligation, and obviously there is a relationship there to the planning bill and what may happen with planning as that evolves. And second is through conservation covenants. But both of them potentially provide a way of giving that legal certainty.
Thanks very much, Nick. Next up, will local authorities be given any additional provision, any additional resources to support delivery of biodiversity net gain? Many struggle to deliver existing ecology-related duties.
So this again goes back to, I think there's links to the earlier points as well about the need for ecological, additional ecological support, which we would all kind of recognise and support. So there was a commitment from government. Obviously, we can't speak on government's behalf, but there was a commitment from government that recognised there is some level of additional burdens on LPAs, and so there is a commitment from government to provide some extra support to local authorities to help address that. We don't know what that level of support might be, but we're hopeful that there might be an announcement about that forthcoming. The other thing I would just highlight there on that as well is that net gain can also be delivered on local authorities' own lands as well. So potentially it itself can also provide a financing mechanism to help contribute towards the longer term management of LPA green spaces where you've got those. So it can potentially be used for that. And then also there is potentially scope, and this would require development over time to develop local kind of advisory services as well, and to recover fees through planning fees, etc. So Warwickshire kind of County Council have significantly grown their own in-house capacity as they've developed net gain over time through the charging of fees to developers and running a kind of local advice service. So again, that's another way of potentially securing some additional resource in. But yeah, there is a watch out for a kind of possible government announcement around additional resource to LPAs.
Thanks, Nick. What happens if the details of any offsite provision isn't known at an application stage? Can it be conditioned with an example provided within the submitted metric?
So I think the key thing would be to understand what the deficit would be in units and what the deficit would be in the types of habitat that are sort of required. So it would be perhaps looking at the results, seeing where if there was, say, a 5% sort of gap between what could be delivered on site and what was needed off site, what the actual sort of habitats that are sort of required, have the trading rules been met, and those sorts of things, and sort of build up a sort of shopping list of future provision and seal and sort of secure that. But in an ideal world, it would be looking for that offsite provision before that's all signed off.
And just to add to what Steve said, it may be that the full details of what's required offsite aren't known, but at that point you may just have an indicative sense of what you think is required. So for mandatory net gain, the kind of development hasn't met its legal obligation until the final offsite element has been registered on this national register, and you can't do that until you've got all the agreements in place. So yes, you could. It's envisaged that you would be able to condition kind of a project to say that actually, yes, you can proceed subject to this kind of final offsite element being kind of sorted out on the register in a way that everyone's happy with, and then that completes the kind of mandatory process.
Great, thank you. Should the use of the metric be explicitly required in local plan policy?
So it would make sense as we lead up to the sort of mandatory approach, which will mandate use of the metric anyway, for local plans to be specific about which metric to use and what percentage net gain to use. And from our perspective, it would make sense for that to be the Biodiversity Metric 3, because that's the sort of direction of travel towards the mandated approach. But until that's mandated, it's for local authorities to decide which metric they need. But for the policies to be fully functional, it would make sense for them to specify a particular metric that you want using. Nick, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that.
No, other than just to say once the mandatory approach comes into force, which is envisaged to be 2 years after the Environment Bill receives royal assent, so we're estimating towards the end of 2023, then everyone will move to a common metric, which will be based on metric 3.
Hi, it's Amanda here. Could I? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, do you want to carry on, Amanda?
I was just going to come in and say, just given the timescales for local plans and policies, and so as not to sort of hamper yourselves in the future, just be very careful how you word the policy. Don't specifically refer to Biodiversity Metric 3.0 because it's likely that there will be updates to that. So what you need to refer to is the government's published Biodiversity Metric, so that it covers you for when there are changes to the metric itself, so that you're always referring to the most current version. Thanks.
Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks, Amanda.
I was just going to also cover that we are, as part of the wider PRAS project, we're going to be sharing some good examples of local plan policy. If you aren't at the point where you're reviewing your local plan, there are other options for you as well. I think one of the things we have been asked through the wider project is, well, if it's going to become mandatory, do we actually need a local plan policy? And I think it's well worth thinking about how you know, you can encompass some sort of more local specifics aside from the metric. So the question was obviously about putting the metric in there, but it is also worth thinking about, you know, how you would link it in strategically, what type of habitats you might be focusing on, that sort of stuff. So it is very useful to have a local plan policy in there to cover the metric and, you know, what percentage you're going for, to make sure that developers are very clear on what the requirements are, but also to cover some sort of local elements that you might want to put in there. So even once it becomes mandatory, it's likely to be useful to have that in policy terms. But yeah, we will be sharing examples, both of policies, also SPDs and other approaches councils have taken where they perhaps don't have they're not at the right stage in their local plan to change their local plan policy, but they've done other things to do that as part of the wider project. So watch this space for those.
Fantastic, thank you. Who is expected to complete the habitat condition assessment sheets? If local planning authorities, will there be any training on identifying habitats and their condition?
So that's going to be the consultant ecologists primarily that will be assessing things in the field and then providing local authorities with the sort of metric outputs that include the condition assessment factor within it. So it won't be down to LPAs to complete it. They'll be just sort of reviewing the outputs provided by the ecological consultants.
Thanks, Steve. The next most voted on question, again slightly wider, but are you able to share examples of standard conditions / section 106 obligations used to secure ecological commitments set out in the metric?
Shall I come in there, Rachel? So just to say
please.
that we are collating those as part of the project. If you're aware of any, we've got a few examples, but if you're aware of any local authorities or you're using those, it would be great if you could share them directly with me. You should have my contact details. So yes, we are sharing those as part of the broader project, but examples are welcomed. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Becky. Will there be guidance as to how biodiversity net gain is to be delivered off-site, for example, setting up local habitat banks, if it cannot be delivered on-site?
Nick, can I draw you in on that one?
Yeah, so there's a series of guidance needs that are being identified in terms of how net gain will get delivered. Some of those potentially will be addressed quite soon, in that we're expecting an imminent kind of consultation from government on the secondary legislation related to net gain. So that at the moment the bill provides the kind of primary legislation. There's a lot of detail still to be set out about how net gain will be applied in practice. A consultation from government is expected in the next couple of weeks, which will cover net gain, secondary legislation and regulations. So some of that extra detail will be set out through that. Beyond that, though, we do think there's some specific guidance needs for planning authorities. So we'll be working with PAS and others and government to provide those. And then for the metric, we're also looking to develop a suite of case studies as well to illustrate how the metric itself could be applied or used in different scenarios. So again, giving off-site examples in that is also something we can provide.
Thanks, Nick. You may have touched on this on your answer to a previous question, Nick, but when consulted on major applications, so those flagged through MAGIC, will Natural England analyse the submitted metric and provide a detailed response?
So Natural England, it's normally has a role as a statutory consultee if a site is likely to have an impact on the sort of designated site, and likewise, obviously, we would continue to do that in those situations. But on and equally for NSIP type schemes, we often get involved in those. Beyond that, it would normally be on a kind of discretionary advice basis only that we would be getting involved in the kind of individual kind of metric calculations. So yeah, normally we would just be involved in the more kind of strategic end of the conversations.
Great, thank you. The metric calculations and spreadsheets are technical and beyond the capability or time resources of existing planning officers to scrutinise. Who will do this?
So I think it's going to be the local planning authority sort of planners and things who will need to do it. It will require a different amount of scrutiny depending on the size, scale and type of habitats that are involved in each of those. As Nick was saying earlier on, there are discussions going on around resourcing and how that might sort of be managed to alleviate some of those pressures. And some of the organisations like Algae have been involved in those discussions. But for a lot of applications, it will be a sort of a quick touch, and you'll be able to sort of review the metric calculations fairly swiftly without drilling into all the detail. It's going to be those where there's the sort of higher end ecological kind of implications that are going to be requiring more additional resource, I would think.
And just to add to that, I think Rachel at the start mentioned that we're always keen to get feedback on the metric and in particular how we can sort of best inform its future development, and that includes both the technical elements, but also its kind of the kind of its usability and how users feel it works for them or otherwise. So if you have ideas around or concerns around its current ability to understand it and engage with it, please do let us know. We are keen to see if there's over time ways we can further improve it. Obviously at the moment it's an Excel based tool. That's not to say that couldn't necessarily change in the future if that was felt to be helpful for people as well. So we are keen to get your feedback basically on in terms of how the kind of the metric works for yourselves as planning authorities, and if there's ways we can further look to try and improve that, we're obviously very open to doing that.
Thank you. So the next question asks, 5 years after development is complete, how does the Biodiversity Net Gain tool, so assuming in the metric, assist checks on the Biodiversity Net Gain achieved? And who is responsible for future evidence and who pays?
Okay, so alongside the sort of mandated approach, work is sort of looking at how we might monitor and evaluate biodiversity net gain in general, and how we might sort of use the metric to do that. I don't think any conclusions have been drawn yet as to sort of who pays or so on, but I think that would probably be looking to developer funding to do that, but I'll lean towards Nick in a minute to sort of fill in some gaps there on that. Nick, can I pass over to you a second?
Yeah, sure. So what we want to ensure is that net gain doesn't just end up in numbers on a spreadsheet, that it actually is delivering kind of physical outcomes on the ground. And so one of the requirements around this is that there is a level of monitoring and reporting that is undertaken to ensure that the habitats that were being indicated and promised when the metric calculation was undertaken actually do get delivered, or that some and that adaptive management is used if things aren't working out as planned. Watch out for the consultation in terms of what it says about monitoring and reporting. It will include, we're expecting it to see a component part of that. Where the net gain is being delivered off-site, it is the price that a landowner charges, that sells, who they sell their biodiverse units for. They are fully entitled to, and I would encourage them to include within that price the full costs associated with the works. That will include any monitoring and reporting that they're being asked to undertake as well. So they will want understanding and clarity from planning authorities as to what level of reporting you would like to see, so that you're happy that the net gains are being delivered over time, so they can price it into what they're charging developers accordingly. It's important for them. They don't, they need to make sure they're not losing money through this as well. So yes, we do want to see monitoring reporting. The register, which I mentioned about earlier, which someone asked a question, where is the register? That's currently being developed. It's an online platform that will include all the, at least offsite net gain delivery, ideally the on-site as well in it. So that will set out what was expected to be delivered, but there's a requirement for the net gains to be reported back to the planning authority over time, over that kind of minimum 30-year time period.
Can I just wade into the detail of how you could use the metric to specifically look at delivery on a development site? Because I think that's part of what the question was. So basically, if you're looking at 5 years after development, that will depend on how many years after the commencement of your biodiversity delivery you're looking at. But within the metric, you have figures for the time to target condition for delivering each habitat. So if for example, you're 5 years down the line, you can check what sort of condition a habitat could be reasonably expected to have been achieved within those 5 years. It might not have got to the good condition that the developer has promised to deliver after 30 years, but you can actually use the figures within the metric to help you to work out whether something is on track to deliver what it's supposed to deliver within the time frame that it should be achieving it in, if you like. So you can use it at that very specific level yourselves to monitor whether you think the habitats are progressing as they should be towards their end point that was originally proposed for post-development delivery.
Great, thank you very much. When will the exceptions for biodiversity net gain be detailed, i.e. talk of small sites not requiring 10%?
So the consultation I referred to will set out in final form the proposed exemptions for net gain. We're not expecting there to be an exemption for small sites, nor are we expecting there to be a reduction of percentage for small sites. There is under development a more simplified version of the metric, which can be used in certain development scenarios. It's aimed for small sites. That's currently out to consultation, so we'd encourage people to kind of look at that and provide us with some feedback on that. But at the moment, we are anticipating and expecting that small sites will be required to deliver the minimum 10% net gain as per larger sites. There will be some exemptions to the net gain requirements, and they will be set out by government when they consult as proposals. So do look out for those, and do provide comments and feedback back to government on those proposed exemptions when they're in the public domain.
Thanks, Nick. Next up, under the quality measures, is there a time limit in which a condition assessment can be considered out of date?
It's not a particular sort of time limit, although we would suggest probably within a sort of couple of years of doing the condition assessment, it should be sort of updated if the application hasn't been submitted at that point. But I think it's just important to identify when that condition assessment was done, and then for those that are reviewing the application to consider whether that's sort of current enough, really. Nick, I don't know whether you or Amanda have got anything to add to that.
The other thing I would add is just also if you'll know your local circumstances, if you're aware of something that has occurred that may have had an impact, especially negatively on the condition of a site, between the original condition assessment and when it was used and provided the information to you, then do always query that or check that back with the developer. But otherwise, as Steve said, normal rule of thumb would be they should be good for a couple of years.
Thanks very much. Just noted that we're starting to lose a couple of people now that the main presentation's over. As I mentioned at the start, we'd be really keen to gather your feedback from today's event. So I've just launched a poll on Slido, which you can access at the top of the page next to the Q&A session. It's 4 very brief questions, and if you could take the time to complete that, we'd be very grateful to hear your feedback.
Thanks, Rachel. Do you want to just ping your, I don't know if you could put your first slide up with the QR code, just in case anyone hasn't got access to Slido, just so you've got the link up there. So just with the QR code, which will flash up, if you're not familiar with using QR codes, it's a really useful way if you haven't got 2 screens, so that you can look at Slido while you're doing this. And you basically just hold your phone up, if you've got a smartphone that is, open the camera, and your camera should immediately recognise that QR code, and then it will open the website. So if you just put that up, Rachel, if you just start presentation mode, that should be the slide in full screen. So yeah, just to say that the main presentation is done now. We're recording both this and the question session, and we will share that after the event. We'll let you know when it's up on the website along with the slides, so that will be shared. So you're very welcome to stay. We've got plenty of questions still coming in, which is really brilliant. But if you are unable to stay for the full session, please do provide your feedback. We're really keen to hear that. If we don't have time to answer all the questions today, as I said, we are compiling a Q&A as part of the wider panel anyway. That will be up on our website very soon. So I'll circulate details of that in due course as well. So your question may not be up there straight away, but it will be added to the FAQs, because obviously there's a huge amount of interest in it. So a lot of details we don't necessarily have at the moment. So yeah, that would be great. So yeah, if you can go to the Slido and do feedback, that would be brilliant. And I'll hand back to Rachel.
Thanks, Becky. Let me just get back up the questions. So next up was, how do you see Biodiversity Net Gain fitting in with the local nature recovery strategies that will be required once the Environment Bill becomes law?
So specifically in terms of the biodiversity metric, we see that sort of providing a basis for some of the strategic significance elements. So to be able to sort of prioritise habitat creation in accordance with the sort of local nature recovery strategies and so on. So that's, I think, in terms of the metric, where I see it sort of dovetailing together a little bit more. Nick, I don't know whether you want to say anything more on sort of wider policy angles.
I think it's just also in terms of local nature recovery strategies, thinking about how locations that you want to prioritise for creation of new habitats or to restore existing ones can also work and support kind of wider local plan policies as well. So what's the relationship with green infrastructure, for example? What's its relationship with access and health and wellbeing agendas, climate change, as I was saying earlier? Because there is the ability, as Steve was indicating, to through the metric to target the delivery of net gain into places that are linked to your local nature recovery strategy, either spatially or in terms of their description. Because if a project can say, actually, it's located in an area of importance for the LNRS, it's able to get a positive weighting, if you like, so it encourages delivery into those areas. And then similarly, just thinking about where a project is delivering entirely on site, it's actually how can it do that delivery in a way that potentially complements what's in the LNRS as well. So yeah, there is the scope to be potentially quite creative around how these join up. And I think we'd be interested and keen to look at people's experiences on that, and if there's opportunities to as this develops, to begin to look at best practice or to share ideas around through PAS and others. I think that would be really helpful.
Thank you. When offsetting off-site, is it the applicant's responsibility to find suitable sites? This delays decisions and is complex in terms of the test for conditions.
So in an ideal world, it would be for the applicant to at least explore initially to try and source where they can provide or find offsite sort of provision. It might be that in discussions with you, there are sites that you're already aware of, or you might want to steer development onto existing LPA sites. But failing that, there's also through the mandated approach likely to be a sort of credit scheme as a sort of last resort, where developers can pay a sort of fixed price per unit to sort of provide that offsite sort of provision, but they will need to sort of go through various checks and balances to demonstrate that they have already tried and failed for whatever reason to source habitat sort of locally where possible. So ultimately it will fall to the developer, but ideally in discussion with yourselves, and then as a fail-safe, there's the National Credit Scheme.
Fantastic, thanks Steve. The next question is that the process assumes an ecological consultant will be engaged for an application, but for many minor developments this isn't the case. Is this an additional cost for applicants?
So I think Nick touched on this earlier, and we're piloting at the moment a small sites metric, so a sort of a version of the metric that's streamlined for smaller developments, and that's been designed with some precautionary principles built into it that mean that it can be kind of done potentially without ecological kind of input, or without the same degree of ecological input as the main metric. So we would encourage people to have a look at that and provide us some feedback as part of the consultation on that. But very much the aim is to try and minimize that ecological kind of input for smaller developments.
Thanks, Steve. The next question is that for many sites, the local planning authority will receive a pre-application inquiry. Should the default position be that you need to engage an ecological consultant before you start?
So I think from the metrics perspective, the earlier that the metric calculation is done and the earlier that metrics are started to sort of factor into that decision-making process, then the more opportunity there is to dovetail gains with things that you're sort of required to do anyway. Things like perhaps if you need to do a sud system, greening that sud system up and sort of making that a better condition and so on. So I would basically say the earlier that you can involve an ecological consultant, the better. And it might be even before site purchase that developers start to look at the ecological impacts of different land scenarios.
And just to really reinforce the point Steve's just made as well, because there are potentially really significant benefits to developments if it can begin to think about the environment more generally at the earliest possible stage of its development process. All too often we come across, and I'm sure everyone on the call does, projects where at the very last minute it's been handed across to an ecologist to say, right, try and make this green, and the poor ecologist got very little room to play with and very little scope to do anything. Whereas considered early, there's opportunities for conversations with other professions involved, so landscape professionals, engineering colleagues, etc., to look at how can the scheme come forward in a way that delivers the various outcomes it's trying to do, with the environment integrated into that as well. So I would just kind of echo Steve's point about, yes, if the earlier they can engage an ecologist and be working collaboratively on this, the better, really.
Thank you. The next question is there a requirement for a plan showing how the various area calculations have been made to be submitted with the metric?
So I think the idea is that the whole metric calculation tool will be submitted. When mandatory net gain sort of comes into play, there's likely to be a net gain plan, although they're still sort of finalising those sort of details that will summarise some bits and sit alongside the metric. But there shouldn't need to be much more than just the metric itself plus the net gain plan. Nick, I don't know whether there's anything additional to add there from the policy side.
Just to reiterate, watch out for the consultation when it comes out, because Steve touched upon the idea of there being a kind of mandatory net gain plan as well, and there will be two elements that come to you as authorities to consider for the mandatory approach. One, which is obviously what we've been talking about, is the metric, but the other complementary bit is the net gain plan, and that should include things such as habitat management plans, set out the kind of wider strategy as to how they're going about achieving net gain, detailing whether it's, if they're going off-site, whether it's just one site or multiple, etc. So it is a kind of critical complementary part, and we're expecting to see that plan being consulted, that plan template being consulted on when the consultation goes live. So do watch out for that in the next couple of weeks when it comes out from government.
Thanks very much. To what extent can you push back and reduce development footprint to enable the 10% on-site rather than jump to a mixture of on and off-site in the first place?
So that's, it seems to Steve's still with us. His screen's gone blank. But yeah, so there's obviously scope for discussions with the developer as to how they want to go about achieving net gain. And as the question is alluding to, it's perfectly possible in many instances to achieve net gain on site. But there may equally be quite valid ecological reasons why that's actually not a sensible thing to do. So it may be that they're quite justified in looking to go off-site, as well as questions about the development footprint. So it's really the conversation between yourselves and the developer in terms of the scheme design and what's the most appropriate strategy for them to be using in the kind of local context.
Thanks, Nick. I think we may have lost Steve. Hopefully he's rejoining in the background. The next question is slightly more policy related anyway. Under mandatory biodiversity net gain, will it be outside of the planning balance, i.e. applications can never be approved if negative, regardless of benefits?
Yeah, so it's a mandatory requirement. So a development would have to achieve this minimum 10% biodiversity net gain. So yes, unless they fall in one of the exempted categories, and hoping that will be a relatively small set of kind of development types that fall into that, yes, they would have to achieve the kind of minimum 10%. The development can't achieve planning permission without it.
Thanks, Nick.
If I could just come in there, Rachel, and we've had a lot of questions about that sort of through our wider events and through conversations with local authorities. So again, we're going to sort of cover that aspect in our FAQs and sort of some stuff around viability as well, because that's come up. So yes.
Thanks, Becky, and that leads nicely into the next question. Will biodiversity net gain need to be tested, costed as part of the viability process in plan making?
So it's a legal requirement, so it's something that the developments have to do. So obviously at the moment, it sits in a slightly different context. It's part of the MPPF. Many local authorities have it set out as a local plan requirement, but it does often get challenged on viability grounds. For the minimum 10%, that's, I think, that's something anyone has to do, irrespective of viability questions. Where viability matters may still come into play is that the bill allows local authorities to still upwardly raise the minimum thresholds for net gain. So at the moment it's minimum 10%. I know some authorities already have local requirements for 20, others are looking at that. So that's an area where viability may come back into question, where a local authority is setting a higher percentage kind of requirement, and in those circumstances would encourage authorities to be looking at what their evidence base is and developing a good sound evidence base where they are asking for or requiring rather figures over and above the kind of national minimum.
Yeah, and again, just to sort of flag that, again, we've got some a little bit of information in our FAQs, but we are going to sort of compile what's available on the viability thing, because obviously there's a bit of a difference between what we have now and what's going to be happening when it's mandatory. We decide to go above the 10%. So yeah, we've got this again, more stuff coming through the wider pathway.
Thanks, Becky. The next question, how do permitted development rights impact on the biodiversity metric?
So permitted development is currently one of the exempted areas for proposed mandatory net gain. Some permitted developments, however, do use the biodiversity metric. I know a number of water companies that are doing projects that they're going through as permitted developments do use it. But I don't know, Rachel, if I heard the question properly, so I just wanted to check I'm not going off on a complete tangent in.
No, so I'll repeat the question. It was a very brief one. How do permitted development rights impact on the biodiversity metric?
Okay, so unless anyone else wants to come in on that, then yes, you can use developments. You can use the metric rather for permitted developments, but it won't be covered by permitted developments. Won't be covered by mandatory net gain. I don't know if anyone else wants to come in on that point at all. Nope.
Thanks, Nick. I'll move on to the next question. How do you envisage enforcement sites are dealt with in terms of securing biodiversity net gains?
So there is, it comes back to the earlier conversation, I think, around the kind of legal mechanisms. So for offsite, there will be a requirement that the habitats are legally secured for this minimum 30-year period using either planning obligation or conservation covenant. And depending on what route and what method rather it's those offsites are being secured will to some extent determine and influence the enforcement of it. So for conservation covenants, it's the responsible authority for that. For planning obligations, it will be through the planning authority, and hence the need for provision of monitoring and reporting information back to authorities to see actually what's being delivered. On site, slightly different, and there are discussions still with government as to how to ensure that on site is delivered to the same standard as off. The bill talks about legally securing for 30 years those on-site components that are a significant part of the overall calculation. But again, I think there's some more details still to be established as to how on-site can be kind of held up to or can enforce in the same way that the off-site would.
Fantastic, thanks, Nick. Will there be a supplied standard on recording, monitoring, reporting of biodiversity net gain by local planning authorities? And how will this be additional supported and funded?
So there are some additional reporting requirements coming through for local authorities, which are slightly broader than biodiversity net gain, but which biodiversity net gain kind of feeds into. So again, through the Environment Bill, there are changes to the NERC Act, so the National Environmental Rural Communities Act, and the biodiversity duty, as was Section 41 duty in that. So there is a change which will require kind of 5-yearly reporting by local authorities on their kind of biodiversity outcomes, the biodiversity strategy, and it's expected that biodiversity net gain data and information will contribute towards that. And then beyond that, there's the actual kind of on-the-ground reporting that I mentioned earlier that the kind of landowners will be expected to provide back to planning authorities or responsible bodies. But for planning authorities, the reporting element is mostly tied into changes around the NERC requirement. And Becky, I don't know if there's anything, if PAS are doing anything on that side of the Environment Bill, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Sorry, I'm just checking whether oh yes, I am. It's all right. I didn't know I was unmuted. We haven't had anything specifically from DEFRA on that as yet. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just to highlight that local authorities obviously have those duties under NERC, but that doesn't, you know, they can still use biodiversity net gain monies and their own land for provision of you know, offsite provision of biodiversity net gain. But yeah, I don't have anything more to add on the sort of NERC duties as yet. Yeah.
Thanks. The next question is, the metric does not take account of protected or priority species. So a low value habitat could be inhabited or valuable in other ways to an important population. Just wondering if any of the panel have any comments on that.
So we are looking at the condition assessments and looking at where there is scope to sort of make some slight adjustments to deal with the sort of main suite of kind of species. There's also the lower end of the grassland habitat spectrum is mainly focused on things like sort of structural diversity and microclimates and things which again are quite valuable for invertebrates, and we're looking at publishing in the not too distant future a 3.1 upgrade to sort of include some of those sort of minor tweaks where possible and some tweaks to the guidance around that. There's also within the metric a sort of ruderal and ephemeral sort of type habitat, which is those sort of rough, scruffy areas around sort of brownfield sites and so on, which are quite useful for invertebrates. And we're suggesting that people can use perhaps the notes column and use the half scores for condition within the metric. So there's a sort of, the condition assessments look at poor, moderate and good condition, but there's a sort of fairly poor and fairly good halfway house scenario where ecological judgment is used. And we're suggesting that for those sort of invert type species that they use those and use the notes columns that I sort of covered in my presentation to justify why they're using those.
Yeah, two things I would add just on top of what Steve has said is, so the question is right in terms of the metric doesn't overtly look at species, but what using a metric like this does do, I think, potentially for the first time, which is a really significant and beneficial outcome for nature, is it begins to require that developments take into account all the habitats they find on site, irrespective of whether the site is designated or not. So habitats that historically everyone has ignored, despite often their valued species, like some of the kind of scrubbier habitats that Steve was talking about. For the first time, this is something development has to now take into account and has to deliver a gain for. So that's positive and welcome. But then secondly, again, as Steve said, the metric isn't a complex ecological model. It uses habitats as a proxy. If people have got and ecologists have identified species of interest on a site, then we would expect them as professionals to be reporting that and making others aware of that in the way that they would do currently as well, and to take those into account through the development as well. So yes, it's important to still consider species. The metric currently doesn't, although we're looking at ways it could be further improved to account for particular species assemblages. But secondly, just bear in mind, it's also for the first time beginning to value habitats that are of great importance for many species, but which historically have been completely overlooked unless they happen to be within a kind of local wildlife site or designated site.
Thanks very much, Nick. We've got 15 minutes remaining, so I'm going to start to wrap up the questions. We'll have, say, 2 or 3 more, and then I'll hand back over to Becky after that. We've had a few questions relating to gardens, so I picked out the one that's been voted on the most, which is, in your example, you included gardens in the calculation of biodiversity net gain. You can't do this as there is no guarantee that gardens will be retained or appropriately managed, and I was just wondering whether the panel had any comments on that.
So I think we touched on this earlier on when that came up, in that we've tried to value them appropriately and tried to value some of the sort of risk multipliers as attached to them appropriately, recognizing the fact that they could be paved over, but there is also evidence to suggest that a lot of them do remain as gardens, and although there is sort of limited control over what happens, that's factored into some of the metric calculations. They're also in there at a very low level, so they don't score very highly. They're sort of fixed at a condition that means that they can't be sort of elevated, and then that condition sort of reduced again by homeowner management. So they're in there recognizing they contribute a little bit more to biodiversity than than just sort of paved areas and the paved sort of development footprint, but they contribute relatively smallly to the overall picture.
Thanks, Steve. Another metric-related one: how should woodland with ash dieback be detailed in the metric?
I guess that's a sort of quite a difficult one. I think it should just be flagged. It will probably likely to be sort of affecting the condition assessment of the metric and should be flagged in the notes and justification column, would be my take on it. Nick, I don't know whether you've got anything to add to that at all.
Yeah, just to kind of reinforce that, I think it's look at be honest about the condition then it. So if you've got a wood that's components of it are dying off, then the condition assessment should pick that up. But also, depending on the level of dieback, some of it may, by that point, actually have fallen into the kind of deadwood categories as well. So yeah, it's, again, it goes back to the point that the metric is a proxy. It can't and doesn't attempt to look at every single kind of potential thing that may be happening within that site. So, but again, you'd expect the ecologist to be, as a professional, kind of highlighting that and reporting that back and scoring the condition of the woodland accordingly.
Thanks, Nick. And I think we'll call this the last question, if that's okay. And any ones that we've not managed to get through today, we've still got an awful lot. As Becky said, we'll try and collate these and add them to the FAQ. The final question that again has quite a few votes: in what form will the metric report be submitted with a planning application? It will need to be made available to the public, so an online tool might be difficult.
So at the moment, it's envisaged that the entire Excel sheet will be submitted and then sort of filed with all the rest of the documentation supporting the planning application, so that anybody from the LPA reviewers to members of the public to NGOs can download and review and see all of the calculations. How that will be dealt with if we move online is still yet to be sort of thought through. We're not in a place where any decisions have been made on that at the moment. We're just sort of trying to work out how best to integrate the metric with other parts of net gain related IT, like the register that Nick was talking about earlier on. So we'll have to sort of consider that as we go forward. But for the moment, the intention is it'll be the Excel tool that's submitted.
Yeah, just to say, agree with what Steve said in terms of, the full tool will be expected to be submitted to you. One thing I would say, actually, just for anyone that's currently is implementing net gain currently, then do encourage, or if possible require, that a full metric of whichever metric they're using is provided to you. Because we've certainly come across instances where people have sent to us screenshots saying this is what the consultants working for the developer have said they've achieved through their metric. Here's the calculation, and we know that it's not possible to achieve the outcomes that they're claiming, and they've been able to kind of just basically try and pull the wool over someone's eyes by taking just writing their own report with some numbers in it, and that not corresponding with anything we know the metric can actually physically allow you to calculate. So would encourage people anyway, just as a matter of course, so if someone's submitting you a metric at the moment, ask them to submit it in full. Don't if they just suggest they can do a report with a kind of table of results, I'd query that, because we've come across instances where people have not necessarily given an accurate reflection of their numbers in that report.
Thanks, Nick. So I think that concludes the Q&A session from today's metric training event. Thank you very much for all the excellent questions. As I said, I'll hand back over to Becky in a second, and like she said, we'll try and pull together the ones that we've not managed to get to. If you do have time, we'd very much value your feedback from the event via the Slido poll. So do please take a couple of minutes just to complete that, and we'd be very grateful. But thank you very much for your time today, and I'll hand back over to Becky.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, really, please do provide your feedback. I mean, hopefully getting Natural England along today, you've seen that they're really keen to understand how this is going to work for you. We don't have all the details yet of how it's going to work in a mandatory way, but we're aware a lot of you are dealing with applications, or you've got your own policies or approaches going on now, and want to understand how that works. And as part of our wider PRAS project, we're really keen to help you not only get ready for what's coming in a couple of years' time through the Environment Bill, but also in terms of what you do now. So please do watch this space. I will circulate, once we've got the recording up on the website, I'll circulate that and the link to you, you'll have the link to our website, and let you know when the Q&As come up. If you're interested in getting more involved in the project, we do have an officer advisory group. Let me know if you're interested in joining that. And I'll circulate some links as well to joining our discussion group. We're looking at setting up a network around this, but also broader environmental planning. So how this links into other aspects of environmental planning. So yeah, there's lots going on. The best way to keep up to date is to sign up to the PAS bulletin, which is, you can sign up to that up through our website. So thanks very much, everyone. Please do let us have your feedback. We will collate the Q&As and answer as many of them as we can. Yeah, and thanks again also to all the Natural England people, particularly Steve and Rachel and Nick, and also Amanda, and in the background Heather helping with the questions. So thank you very much, and I hope that's been useful, and we will catch up soon. Thank you. I've just been asked to put the link to our website up on here, so I will just do that now, if I can remember what it is. So just stay on for a couple of seconds if you want that link while I get it up. There we go. Okay, right, I'm just putting the link up now. Okay. And just to say that it's got some early info on there, but we will be adding to that as we go along, and particularly over the next few weeks, actually lots more going up there. And just one more thing to say, I know everyone's dipping off. The DEFRA consultation, we expect to come out later this month, and we will be running some events in conjunction with that as well. So please do keep an eye out for those. Right, thanks everyone. I'll end there. Bye-bye.